Hey, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Quarbit, and I will be your host today for Imperator Rome. This will be one of my first attempts at sounding serious while discussing a Paradox game, since Imperator has been getting quite a lot of flack since its launch, for rather good reasons, I'll admit. And yes, it has been a while since I've last showcased any part of this game on my channel, partly because I still have less than 100 hours in-game, and can't quite consider myself nearly as skilled as I am in, say, EU4 or Hearts of Iron, a game which I still can't seem to get much better at. That being said, I have been picking up Imperator from time to time. After all, what time I have spent in the game shouldn't be dismissed, since it's given me many opportunities to understand the direction Paradox wants to take it, and to get adjusted to the new IR formula every time they update it. That's also the main reason I've abstained from making a Let's Play series, since the 1.1 Pompey patch was still rather abysmal as it was, and the 1.2 beta got updated far too often, and obviously a corrupt save file is a killing blow for any Let's Play. That, and the fact that I thoroughly believe there is not yet an audience for not only Imperator on YouTube, but even in the game itself, seen by the average player count on any given day. Now, however, it's time to end that long intro and take a look at how the game's transformed with the new 1.2 Cicero update. If you're wondering how we'll be judging the game's quality in comparison to how it was before, let me make this exceedingly clear. I believe a game should be judged based on its own merit. Far too often do I hear a complaint about the game having significantly less depth than modern EU4 or CK2, the most common examples since Imperator is very often seen as a hybrid of the two. Now, I can't quite make an accurate statement about that since I've only really experienced EU4 in its entirety, compared to hardly even trying CK2. But it seems from what I've heard that yes, elements of both games are heavily incorporated into the main formula of Imperator, and perhaps making a few quips here and there about character depth or resistance mechanics, and suggesting improvements that might shape the game slightly more in either direction, may be justified and to some extent encouraged. The argument, however, is quite a complicated one, seeing as if you compare the launch statuses of all three games, Imperator often has the upper hand in many categories. But a good counter to that argument is of course that Imperator is a game released in 2019, and comparing it to games released more than a half-decade prior would be foolish, to which I agree partially for reasons that will make this video much longer than I intend for it to be. As a good analogy though, let's say that EU4 and CK2 were buckets filled with a quarter of the way with features, while Imperator Rome is a bathtub filled an eighth of the way with features. There are far more territories and unit types in Imperator, and the scale was intended to be much larger than its predecessors in the grand strategy genre, but it leaves the game devoid of character, where many nations end up feeling nearly identical, even in very different regions. With all that being said, we'll now discuss the changes made in the Imperator Rome 1.2 Cicero patch, and what actual impacts they've had on the way the game plays, not just for some nations, but for all of them. There are many things that change the quality of life for the game, many of which are new features, but there are only a few high-impact changes that I'll be covering to begin with, since I feel like these have major consequences, some of which are positive, some of which are questionable. Now, I would be doing the developers a disservice if I didn't mention first the removal of monarch power and the introduction of political influence. You see, this is one of the changes that can easily be seen as positive. The monarch power system was borrowed from EU4, but lacked the same importance or diversity of uses. Not to break my own rule and use EU4 as a comparison though, I simply mean to use it as reference for how a good monarch power system is implemented. In Imperator, for instance, using oratory power to get a claim or improve relations with another country is rather questionable. And in other cases such as military power, you had very regular uses for it, but some of your most important military bonuses would be reliant on you hoarding it for a long period of time, making it so there were essentially no moments of being able to use it freely. The whole system was essentially a massive mess, and the players didn't hold back on letting Paradox know how terribly it functioned. Now, however much I would have liked to see the Monarch power system be reworked into something more respectable, since I like it as a concept, I'll admit that they probably went with the better decision in this case. Political influence serves not only the purpose of changing laws, but also things such as selecting national ideas and making province improvements, which can be exceedingly powerful. Other diplomatic actions, such as fabricating claims, now also uses political influence, which makes a hell of a lot more sense. I think this way of handling the power system is interesting since it doesn't give a massive amount of power to empires, but does give a proportional percent bonus to rank, allowing one to improve more and more as they grow. Next, I do well to talk about the other new power system introduced, military experience. Oddly enough, this makes the game seem a little bit more like Hoi 4, the farthest possible game I thought they would draw inspiration from. It works much the same way as in Hoi 4. Training and fighting will increase a unit's experience, but in Imperator, average unit experience is what gives you the military experience points, as well as a flat rate. Military experience is used solely for military traditions. So, do I like this new system? Well, to be honest, not really. Don't get me wrong, I think it's leagues above having a whole mana category dedicated to your military traditions. However, I'm not a fan of how it serves literally no other purpose. We have to keep in mind that eventually a player will complete their tradition tree, at which time, what's the point in having the system anymore? There are no special bonuses for having a lot of it, and I think that's something that should definitely be addressed. Although having high cohort experience will reduce the amount of damage that unit takes in battle, up to 33%, it's not all too often that you'll actually reach that effectiveness. Military experience, however, is something I think you should give a scaling bonus to, such as morale or discipline. After all, having a highly experienced military shouldn't be a wasted adjective. Next, of course, we have to talk about the changes to some fundamentals of geography and civilization. By this, I mean the introduction of territory levels and food mechanics. Territories, as provinces are now called, are split into settlements, cities, and metropolises. Now, in my personal opinion, this is one of the better decisions they've made from a historical standpoint. Clearly, you didn't just have bustling cities every 500 or so kilometers back in those days. Instead, your most common territory will be a settlement, which holds fewer pops, has fewer buildings, but are the producers of food for cities in the same province. Settlements can also be upgraded into cities and further into metropolises, which both have better ratios in terms of freemen and citizens, making them also necessary for technological development. Now, I don't entirely want to address the odd fact that food is all province-based, since that's probably done from a game design point of view, but we do have to point out how absolutely absurd it is that the city of Vai would much prefer to get its food supply from, say, Fundi than from Nepete. Anyways, the food mechanic serves little purpose other than forcing you to manage your army logistics a little bit more carefully, since an army will use the food of the province they're standing in based on their size. I'm not sure if the food mechanic was absolutely necessary, but it serves the role of making sure players don't simply spam out cities, since they consume massive quantities of food as the game progresses. It's definitely a new style of balancing that we haven't seen before from Paradox, at least not in my memory. And I feel like it requires the player to do more planning for the future rather than how reactionary the old Imperator formula was for cities. Speaking of which, I mentioned briefly that settlements hold fewer buildings than cities. There are also differences in what type of buildings can be built in settlements and cities. Cities now have 14 building options to pick from, while settlements only have 7. At first, I thought that having so many building types would be completely ludicrous for this game, and was just a sad attempt at adding depth to a much underdeveloped area of the game. But now I realize that's simply my inexperience showing. In reality, the diversity of buildings are there for the purpose of min-maxing different cities as centers for things such as slave production, research, manpower production, etc. In tandem with province improvements, one should be able to produce multiple cities surrounding a metropolis in a province. The food supply for these would come from the settlements that have been specialized in producing food. So to the whole new territory and building system, I have to say Hats off to you, Imperator devs. You've solved the problem of playing tall while giving wide empires the ability to make their capitals hubs of tech production fueled by the outer territories shipping food trade goods. And while we're on the topic of territories, let's talk about the changes to pops. I honestly forgot most of these changes were added in 1.2 since they were some of the first additions to the beta. I have to start off by saying, goddamn does the new system feel nice. Previously, the only way you could get auto-pop assimilation, migration, etc. was through governor policies, and the main method you were forced to use was clicking everywhere and spending points. This was a 0 out of 10 system, probably one of my biggest complaints about the game at launch. That and the previous pitiful macro builder combined made quality of life go down the drain. Now though, it's all pretty much done automatically over time. Yes, I'm aware that migration was already an automatic process to some degree. However, now it's done in a much different manner. Pops will move in and out of places as they please over time based on migration attraction. However, it makes a large deal more sense now and will not lead to pops flowing into an already starving overpopulated city. A nice touch, I have to say. You can, of course, still promote the assimilation and conversion of pops through governor policies and buildings, but you're no longer forced to micromanage every pop in a newly conquered province. Finally, we have one more reworked system to introduce. Some parts of the government, specifically laws, have been reworked significantly. I much prefer this version since it's one of the few areas of the game where you see progression happen in a clear-cut way. No longer do you have to choose laws based on what you're willing to give up for something else, but they mainly give only bonuses. It's just a matter of which bonuses you'd like more. For tribes, it's based on centralization, allowing you to unlock fairly powerful laws as you progress. And for more civilized nations like Rome that have a senate or a monarchy, it's based entirely on your tech level, meaning that your progression as a tribe when you convert to a democracy or an autocracy continues as you start to catch up in tech. I'm sure I missed a few things here and there, but those are most of the important changes made in Cicero 1.2. Now, as much as I'd like to continue singing praises about this game and how hard the development team was working on this project, when they really had no obligation to do so, I can't simply fall into the trap that, just because there are good changes and improvements being made, doesn't necessarily mean the game is actually good. Yes, I've been talking about these new and exciting features for almost 10 minutes now, but we also have to turn our attention towards some of the other things that matter, such as depth. Many new events were added into the game, of course, along with many new heritages. However, I find that simply having the equivalent of EU4 traditions will not satisfy many people, myself included. Yes, the game has developed its way into being more fun than a chore in my opinion. However, I cannot say much for the replayability in relatively similar regions like I could for many other Paradox games. And with so many tags, it might end up being impossible to give them all heritages and military traditions. But what's truly missing from this game right now is the feeling that the country you're currently playing has the ability to at least become unique after the first 50 to 100 years. Uniqueness and the ability to branch off and do your own thing in your own crazy style is a staple of Paradox games in general, and it's something I believe the Imperator team is already hard at work on. Even if it's in the form of DLC, I'll be interested in knowing how this will be dealt with in the 1.3 update that's supposed to come out in the vague timeline of Q4. Overall, as I'd give Imperator 1.1 a 4.5 star rating out of 10, I'd like to say that the 1.2 Cicero update has earned it a solid 6.5 stars. I still believe it has a way to go, of course, but I'm sure we'll eventually get there. Hopefully this review was insightful for many of you and helped you decide whether or not to pick up the game right now or wait for later. I'm open to any questions in the comment section below, so don't be afraid to ask away. If you enjoyed today's video and you're interested in seeing more Paradox videos like this, then of course be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell on the off chance that you'll actually get notified. This is Quarbit signing off, and as always, have a fantastic day.